Lesson 1.8 is about algebraic expressions, which we will define in the next slide. But one of the terms in the definition is a variable. So let's think about what that means. It's a symbol, usually a letter, that represents a number. It doesn't have to be a letter, but typically it is. So you might have a plus b, where a and b are variables. They're called variables because their value can vary depending on the conditions. Like we might say, write an equation where we say a plus 3 equals 10. Now a has one specific value, it has to be 7. But in the a plus b example here, a and b could be any number. So now that we have kind of gone over what a variable is, we can use that word in a sentence and make sense to us. An expression is a mathematical phrase that has operational symbols like the plus symbol, minus, maybe squared, an exponent. Those are operations. Division, multiplication, addition, subtraction are the typical ones, but there's also squaring and others. So you have operational symbols, maybe numbers or variables. There can just be variables, or it can just be numbers. But an expression has that combination of some of those things in it. But an expression is not an equation, so it doesn't have an equal symbol in it. So if you're asked to write an expression, that's different than being asked to write an equation. So let's take a look at some examples of expressions. You use n a lot of times, n plus 4 is an expression. N squared is an expression. 6 plus 2 is an expression. The expression doesn't have to have variables in it. If it does have a variable in it, it's an algebraic expression. If it just has numbers like 6 plus 2, it's an arithmetic expression, just arithmetic, just with numbers. That's what that means. Or we could have n, let's say 3n, which means when you have a number written next to a letter, it means multiply. So 3n means 3 times n plus 16. That's an expression. But what's not an expression is if I say equals 12. That's an equation now. It's made up of an expression. There's an expression within the equation, but this whole thing here, 3n plus 16 equals 12, is an equation, not an expression. If you're asked to evaluate an expression, it indicates that there's directions that indicate that you have an expression with some variables in it, but you know the numerical value of the variables. So in this example, a is always going to be 4 and b is always going to be 10. So if you have 3a plus 2b, you can just substitute wherever you see an a, you put a 4, and wherever you see a b, you put a 10. So the way you should do this is to say 3, I'll use a dot, times 4 plus 2 times 10. Then you follow the rules for order of operations, which is multiplication comes first. So we do 3 times 4 gives us 12. We save the addition because we have to do 2 times 10 first, which gives 20. And I need to go out to the right here, and 12 plus 20 is 32. So 3a plus 2b is worth 32. When we do 4a squared, that would be 4 times 4 to the second power minus 2 times 10. So we have to do powers first. 4 times 4 is 16, and 4 times 16 is 64. So that's 64, 2 times 10 is 20. 64 minus 20 is 44. I would have preferred to work down on this one, but I needed space at the bottom. Ran out of space at the bottom. But this is really the kind of format that I'd like to see you use, where you write the expression, then put the value for the variables in, then do the arithmetic. And I really would have liked to continue to work down and just write, I'll squeeze it in there, write the 32 down here instead of over to the right. Then you just work top to bottom when you're evaluating and then simplifying. The final concept I'd like to go over for this lesson is going from words to expressions. So you either hear or you see a sentence, or it doesn't have to be a sentence in this case, but these are sentences. But then you're asked to write them using mathematical symbols. So the first one is phrase, the product of x plus 9 and y minus 5. There's a lot going on there. You see product means multiply, plus means add. minus means subtract, but how do you put this all together? So you have to really use some logical reasoning to figure this out. So we have to have the product of two numbers here, or two things, not numbers, two expressions. The first is x plus 9. That's the first factor, x plus 9, because this product of refers to x plus 9 and y minus 5. So we're going to multiply those two things. So how do you represent that? You're going to have to use parentheses because we have to do x plus 9. And then we want to multiply that by y minus 5. And this is probably a new notation for you. But when you have things written in parentheses next to each other, it means multiply. So if I would have put, if I wanted to say 9 times 5, I can just write it as 9 in parentheses and 5 in parentheses. So that's some background you needed to know in order to do this exercise. So this stands for 9 times 5. This would be x plus 9 times y minus 5. Then the second one, the quantity a plus b multiplied by 4. In an earlier lesson, we learned that when you have the phrase the quantity, the things that follow are in parentheses. So we're going to have a plus b in parentheses, and then we're going to use one of the same things we had in the previous example. A plus b in parentheses. I could write, and then it's multiplied by 4. I could put an x and a 4, or I can just write a 4. So I can do it this way. That means times 4. Or I could just put, an x and a 4. So that's the quantity a plus b multiplied by 4.